23 years, $220 million laundered. Al-Shabaab operatives embedded across Minnesota. Tonight, we expose the network hiding in plain sight.
At 4:47 a.m. on February 11th, 2026, under the dim glow of streetlights cutting through Minneapolis's pre-dawn darkness, a convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled to a synchronized stop across 7 neighborhoods. Engines idled, breath fogged in the bitter cold. Federal agents, clad in tactical gear bearing the insignia of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, checked their watches. In exactly 90 seconds, Operation Northern Reckoning would begin. Residents still slept behind frosted windows, unaware that the largest immigration enforcement action in Minnesota's history was about to unfold on their streets. The silence held for one more moment. Then, at precisely 4:49 a.m., doors opened. Boots hit frozen pavement, and everything changed. The Department of Homeland Security's announcement came at 6:15 a.m., delivered with bureaucratic precision that couldn't mask its magnitude. Federal agents had executed coordinated enforcement actions across Minneapolis and surrounding communities, targeting what officials described as a network of individuals with outstanding deportation orders and criminal violations. The scale was unprecedented. 83,000 names. The entire Somali immigrant population in the Twin Cities metro area now fell under federal scrutiny. ICE Acting Director Thomas Hendricks stood before cameras, his voice steady and unyielding. This operation represents our commitment to enforcing immigration law without exception. Those who have exhausted legal remedies and ignored deportation orders will face consequences. Behind him, charts displayed detention facilities across 3 states, transport logistics, and a timeline stretching into 2027. This wasn't a raid. This was systematic deconstruction of an entire community. But to understand how Minneapolis became ground zero for the largest deportation operation since the 1950s, you have to go back. Back to the fall of 2024, when an interagency task force codenamed Sentinel Watch began tracking asylum fraud patterns emanating from refugee resettlement organizations. Immigration and Customs Enforcement investigators, working alongside FBI analysts and State Department fraud detection units, noticed something disturbing. Thousands of asylum applications from Somali nationals contained identical narratives, recycled trauma stories, and fabricated persecution claims. The applications originated from a network of immigration attorneys and nonprofit organizations across Minneapolis. What federal agents expected to find was document fraud, small-scale corruption, maybe a few dozen cases. What they discovered instead was an industrial-scale operation that had been running for over 2 decades, systematically exploiting America's refugee system while genuine victims waited in camps overseas. The investigation began with surveillance. For 11 months, agents monitored offices in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, tracking who entered, when, and how long they stayed. They intercepted communications, analyzed financial transactions flowing through Hawala networks, informal money transfer systems that leave no paper trail. They embedded undercover operatives who posed as asylum seekers, recording consultations where they were coached to fabricate persecution stories, memorize false timelines, and cry on cue during immigration hearings. One recording, later entered as evidence in federal court, captured an immigration attorney telling an undercover agent, "Your story needs more blood. Tell them your brother was beheaded. Tell them you watched." Immigration judges eat that up. The cost for this service? $15,000, payable in cash or through untraceable international wire transfers. By March 2025, the Sentinel Watch Task Force had identified 47 individuals operating what prosecutors would later call the most sophisticated immigration fraud conspiracy in United States history. But that was only the beginning. As investigators peeled back layers of the operation, they discovered the fraud network was a facade for something far darker. Financial analysis revealed that the immigration attorneys and nonprofit directors weren't just charging fees for fraudulent applications. They were collecting ongoing payments from immigrants after arrival, payments that continued for years, sometimes decades. These weren't legal fees. They were tributes, protection money paid to a syndicate that controlled everything from housing placement to employment opportunities within Minneapolis's Somali community. Those who refused to pay faced retaliation. Anonymous calls to ICE, evidence of their fraudulent asylum claims delivered to authorities. Family members back in Somalia threatened through encrypted messaging apps. The network had created a parallel justice system, a shadow government that operated openly in America's heartland while federal authorities remained blind. If this investigation shocks you, hit the like button right now. This story exposes vulnerabilities in our immigration system that threaten national security. The evidence demands attention. The public deserves truth. The real breakthrough came on August 14, 2025, when FBI cyber analysts cracked encrypted servers housed in a nondescript office building on Lake Street. What they found inside those servers rewrote the entire investigation. Financial records revealed the network had processed over $220 million through shell corporations registered in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. The money flowed from Minneapolis to accounts in Dubai, Istanbul, Nairobi, and Mogadishu. But it wasn't just money moving through this digital highway. Intelligence analysts discovered communications between network operators in Minneapolis and Al-Shabaab operatives in Somalia. The terrorist organization, designated by the State Department as a foreign terrorist entity, was using the immigration fraud network to funnel operatives into the United States. Encrypted messages detail plans to place individuals with extremist ties into positions at airports, government buildings, and critical infrastructure facilities across Minnesota. One message, translated from Somali, read, "The sheep think we are refugees. They process our paperwork while we study their weaknesses. Patience brings victory." Federal investigators now faced a terrifying reality. For 23 years, since the early 2000s, individuals connected to terrorist networks had potentially entered the United States through fraudulent asylum claims, settled in Minneapolis with fabricated identities, and integrated into American society. How many were active operatives? How many were sleeper agents awaiting activation? The Department of Homeland Security launched an emergency review of every Somali asylum case processed through Minneapolis since 2001. The number that emerged from that review stopped officials cold. 83,000 individuals had entered the United States through asylum claims processed by the identified fraud network. Not all were terrorists. Not all were criminals. But every single case was tainted by fraud. Every application was suspect. And under federal immigration law, asylum obtained through fraud is void. Deportation orders could be issued immediately. Behind the legalese and policy discussions, real human beings faced catastrophic consequences. Families who had fled genuine violence in Somalia, who had been exploited by the fraud network but had no knowledge of terrorist connections, now found themselves classified as deportation priorities. Children born in Minneapolis, who had never set foot in Somalia, watched federal agents arrive at their homes before dawn. Elderly refugees who had spent 2 decades building small businesses, learning English, becoming American, suddenly held deportation notices with their names misspelled and their stories reduced to case numbers. The Somali community in Minneapolis fractured overnight. Fear replaced trust. Neighbors suspected neighbors. Mosques emptied as families stayed home, terrified that attendants would flag them for enforcement. Community leaders who had built bridges between immigrant populations and law enforcement found themselves paralyzed, unable to condemn terrorism while also protecting innocent families from collective punishment. The operation's scope required months of preparation. ICE contracted with private detention companies to create holding capacity for thousands of detainees. Transport planes were arranged through military logistics channels. Somali government officials negotiated repatriation terms, though Somalia's fragile government could barely manage its own territory, let alone absorb tens of thousands of deportees. Minnesota Governor Rebecca Walsh, a Democrat who had championed refugee resettlement programs, found herself in an impossible position. She condemned the fraud network and expressed support for prosecuting criminals, but also pleaded for individualized case reviews rather than mass deportation. Her statement, issued on January 28, 2026, captured the moral complexity. Justice requires precision. We must punish the predators who exploited vulnerable refugees while protecting the innocent who were victimized by the same network. Mass deportation based on association rather than evidence is not justice. Is collective punishment. Federal officials rejected her appeals. The law was clear. Fraudulent asylum claims provided no legal basis for remaining in the United States. Type justice in the comments if you believe immigration law must be enforced equally. This isn't about targeting specific communities. This is about preserving the integrity of systems that protect genuine refugees while excluding those who exploit American generosity. Operation Northern Reckoning's execution phase began at 4:49 a.m. on February 11, 2026, with simultaneous actions across 43 locations. Federal agents, supported by local police units in some jurisdictions and operating independently in others, executed warrants for the arrest of individuals with outstanding deportation orders. The scene in Cedar Riverside, Minneapolis's historic Somali neighborhood, turned chaotic within minutes. Residents emerged from apartment buildings to find streets blocked by federal vehicles, agents in tactical gear escorting handcuffed individuals toward transport vans, and families screaming as parents were separated from children. Video captured on cell phones and uploaded to social media within minutes showed a father being forcibly removed from his home while his 3 children, all under 10 years old and all American citizens by birth, cried on the front steps. By 7:30 a.m., Minneapolis police received over 200 emergency calls from Cedar Riverside alone. Officers responding to potential domestic disturbances instead found federal immigration operations in progress. Some local officers stood by, uncertain whether to intervene, assist, or simply observe. The jurisdictional ambiguity created confusion that protesters would later exploit. At 8:15 a.m., crowds began forming near the IC field office on Fort Snelling. What started as a few dozen demonstrators grew to over 3,000 by noon. Somali community members, refugee advocates, civil rights attorneys, and progressive activists converged, blocking the entrance and surrounding transport vehicles attempting to move detainees to processing centers. Minnesota State Patrol officers formed lines to maintain order, but tensions escalated as rumors spread through the crowd. False reports of children being detained without parents, of elderly refugees suffering medical emergencies in custody, of IC agents using excessive force, none verified, all inflammatory, circulated on social media and galvanized more protesters to the scene. By 3 p.m., the Minnesota National Guard was placed on standby. Governor Walsh, desperate to prevent violence, negotiated with federal officials for a temporary operational pause to allow community leaders access to detention facilities and verify detainee welfare. ICE officials refused. The operation would continue on schedule. Simultaneously across the metro area, federal agents raided the offices of immigration attorneys and nonprofit organizations identified in the fraud investigation. At 9:20 a.m., agents entered the law offices of Ahmed Hassan, a prominent immigration attorney who had represented thousands of asylum seekers over 2 decades. Hassan wasn't present. He had fled to Canada 3 days earlier after being tipped off about the impending operation, but his files were. Agents seized 42 boxes of documents, 17 hard drives containing client records, and financial statements revealing he had collected over $12 million in fees since 2010. His paralegal, present during the raid, was arrested on conspiracy charges after agents found evidence she had notarized fraudulent affidavits claiming asylum seekers faced persecution. Similar raids at 6 other law offices and 4 nonprofit organizations yielded comparable evidence. By the end of the first day, federal prosecutors had enough documentation to charge 34 individuals with crimes ranging from immigration fraud to money laundering to providing material support to terrorist organizations. The most significant arrest came at 11:45 a.m. when FBI agents detained Yusuf Abdi Ibrahim, executive director of the Somali Community Alliance, a nonprofit that had received over $8 million in federal grants since its founding in 2005. Ibrahim, who had testified before Congress on refugee issues and advised Minneapolis city officials on immigrant integration, maintained encrypted communications with al-Shabaab financial facilitators, according to FBI translations. The indictment alleged he used his position to identify and recruit individuals sympathetic to extremist ideology, providing them with fraudulent asylum documentation to enter the United States while reporting them to federal authorities as model refugees who were successfully integrating. His dual role, publicly championing refugee rights while privately enabling terrorist infiltration, embodied the investigation's central horror. The betrayal wasn't just of immigration law. It was betrayal of the thousands of legitimate refugees whose reputations and safety were now compromised by association with a network they had no knowledge of and no control over. Share this video right now. This story is being suppressed by mainstream media outlets afraid to confront the uncomfortable reality of immigration system exploitation. The only way this information reaches the public is through independent sharing. Hit the share button. Send this to everyone you know. By February 14, 2026, 72 hours into Operation Northern Reckoning, ICE had detained 1,847 individuals for immigration violations. Of those, 423 were identified as having direct connections to the fraud network through financial payments or communications with network operators. The remaining 1,424 had asylum cases processed by attorneys or organizations under investigation, making their legal status suspect even if they had no knowledge of fraud. Federal immigration judges began expedited hearings to review cases, but the backlog was immediate and overwhelming. Each case required individual assessment of the asylum claim's validity, evidence of fraud, and potential security concerns. Legal aid organizations scrambled to provide representation, but they were vastly outnumbered. For every attorney volunteering time, there were dozens of detainees without counsel, facing deportation orders in hearings that lasted an average of 11 minutes. The human cost mounted with mathematical precision. Children were placed in emergency foster care when both parents were detained. Businesses shuttered overnight when owners were arrested, leaving employees without income or explanation. Elderly refugees with medical conditions requiring ongoing treatment found themselves in detention facilities ill-equipped to provide specialized care. One detainee, a 67-year-old woman with diabetes and heart disease, died in custody on February 16th while waiting transfer to a medical facility. ICE officials stated she received appropriate care. Her family's attorney alleged negligence. An investigation was promised. The Somali community added her name to the growing list of casualties from an operation they viewed as indiscriminate and cruel. Federal officials maintained the operation targeted only those with deportation orders and criminal violations. The distinction between legal enforcement and community devastation became irrelevant to families watching their lives disintegrate in real time. Nationally, Operation Northern Reckoning became a flashpoint in America's endless immigration debate. Conservative lawmakers praised the administration's willingness to enforce laws that previous administrations had ignored, arguing that failure to act on outstanding deportation orders undermined entire legal immigration system. Senator James Whitmore of Texas stated, "For years, we've been told immigration law matters. Now we're enforcing it, and suddenly there's outrage. You can't have it both ways. Either laws mean something or they don't." Progressive lawmakers condemned the operation as discriminatory targeting of a specific ethnic and religious community, pointing out that comparable enforcement actions weren't being conducted against other immigrant populations with outstanding deportation orders. Representative Ilhan Omar, herself a Somali refugee who had represented Minneapolis in Congress, delivered an impassioned floor speech. "This is not justice. This is collective punishment. This is the weaponization of immigration enforcement to terrorize a community because of their faith and origin. History will judge us for this moment." But beneath the political theater, uncomfortable questions persisted. How had a fraud network operated for over 2 decades without detection? Why had federal oversight of refugee resettlement organizations been so minimal that industrial-scale fraud went unnoticed? How many individuals with terrorist connections had actually entered the United States through this network, and where were they now? The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General launched an investigation into systemic failures that enabled the fraud network to flourish. Preliminary findings leaked to media outlets on February 20th revealed that multiple agencies had received credible tips about asylum fraud in Minneapolis as early as 2008, but those tips were never elevated to investigative priority. Budget constraints, staffing shortages, and political sensitivity around refugee programs all contributed to institutional paralysis. The fraud network exploited that paralysis perfectly, operating openly because they correctly calculated that authorities lacked the will to investigate immigrant communities with sufficient rigor. The operation's final toll, as of March 1st, 2026, remains incomplete. ICE has detained over 3,000 individuals, with hundreds more identified for future enforcement actions. Deportation flights to Somalia began on February 25th, carrying the first wave of individuals whose cases were expedited through immigration courts. Federal prosecutors obtained indictments against 47 individuals connected to the fraud network, with trials scheduled to begin in June 2026. The Somali community in Minneapolis, once vibrant and growing, now exists in a state of suspended terror, uncertain which neighbor will disappear next, which family will be shattered by dawn raids, which children will become orphans because American law classifies their parents as removable aliens. Churches and mosques across Minnesota have declared themselves sanctuary spaces, promising to shield families from deportation, though the legal authority to do so remains questionable at best. This wasn't just an immigration enforcement operation. This was the exposure of a decades-long exploitation of American refugee policies, a betrayal by individuals who weaponized compassion for profit and ideology, and a reckoning that swept away innocent lives alongside guilty ones. What started as a fraud investigation became a window into systemic vulnerabilities that enemies of the United States have studied and exploited. Behind the legal offices and nonprofit organizations offering help to desperate refugees, a network operated that served interests hostile to American security. They hid in plain sight, shielded by progressive politics that treated scrutiny of refugee programs as inherently xenophobic, protected by institutional reluctance to investigate immigrant communities with the same rigor applied elsewhere. Like this video, if you believe national security cannot be sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Comment enforcement if you support holding fraudsters and criminals accountable regardless of their background. Subscribe and share this channel if you want investigations that mainstream media refuses to conduct. The question that haunts Minneapolis tonight, as families bolt doors and children ask why their friends vanished, is this: how many other communities harbor similar networks? How many other fraud operations have flourished for decades in cities across America, exploiting systems designed to protect the vulnerable while enabling those who mean us harm? Federal authorities assure us they're investigating. Task forces are being formed. Resources are being allocated. But for 83,000 people whose lives now hang in legal limbo, for a community fractured by fear and betrayal, for a city struggling to reconcile compassion with security, those assurances ring hollow. The truth is brutal and unavoidable. We built systems of mercy, and predators turned them into weapons. We welcomed refugees, and terrorists hid among them. We trusted institutions to vet those seeking sanctuary, and those institutions failed catastrophically. Operation Northern Reckoning isn't just about Minneapolis. It's about the invisible infrastructure of exploitation existing in every city that becomes a resettlement hub, waiting to be exposed, waiting to be dismantled, waiting to extract its human cost from communities who never saw it coming until federal agents arrived before dawn and everything changed forever.